Today I have a very major project to undertake, and the models I'm going to be working on in this project are concealed within these two Ziploc bags. They are a pair of rotting Lindsay Alco FAs. As you can see, this one is already crumbled and is in pieces, and the one up here is an unpowered dummy unit, which is mostly intact, but they're both going to need some major work. So let me get these things out of the Ziploc bag that's currently protecting them, and let me show you all of the components that are damaged or broken on both of these models. So I've got both of the models split up into their two separate piles, well, pile in one instance, and here they are. This one does in fact run. I'm not going to show you it running because obviously that's not what we're most concerned about right now, but it does start oddly. Somehow the motor, all the wiring and whatnot in here is good, despite how that locomotive is actively crumbling. But I'm going to start by showing you the dummy unit, which is actually in slightly better condition. As you can see, everything cosmetically seems to be intact. There are a few signs of crackage and whatnot around this model, so it might need some reinforcing, but it seems to be almost completely intact in terms of the cosmetics. In terms of the frame, even though this is a dummy model, it uses a very similar style frame as this unit. However, I don't think I'm going to be able to reuse it. As you can see, there's a block of wood here, and this piece is just completely free and broken. So obviously, both of these frames are completely zinc rotted through, and I'm thinking the best case scenario is I'll probably have to craft two completely new frames out of styrene, which should take a lot of work off camera. Now, onto the powered unit, which is much worse for wear. As you can see, at the front of the locomotive, almost everything seems to be intact. Up here, we do have quite a bit of damage. On this side over here, there's a little bit of cracking and damage as well, but as you can see, most of the rear of the model is missing. We actually have all the cosmetic pieces to put back together, and the way these models are designed, I think it's actually going to be possible to put these back together and reinforce them. As you can see, there's a lot of room between the frame of the model and the actual shell, so I may be able to use some styrene reinforcements to keep these together, but we'll have to see how that goes. The other troubling thing is the frame on this model is even more broken than the one on that model. As you can see, it's broken in multiple different places, and there's really no way to even keep this truck in place, as the rear coupler assembly, this part here, has the other part of the piece that holds this rear truck in place. So obviously, that's not going to work. But just to make sure I can completely analyze the damage and figure out how I can design a new frame for these guys, I'm going to put all these parts off to the side once again. I'm going to take the shells, or what remains of the shells, off both of the models, and we will go from there. After quite a bit more work, I got the chassis actually taken apart, and I've actually discovered some neat little things about these. For one, I think I am actually going to try and rebuild these original chassis. Yes, they are zinc rotted, but based on the design of these, I think it's entirely possible for me to fully reinforce these with some extra styrene, and I think that and a little bit of super glue should actually keep these together. Again, it will not be a permanent fix, but I think it's a fix that'll get these moving again until I decide to actually build some brand new chassis for these, which will take quite a while. On the other truck, as you can see, this front little piece is crumbled. This piece I'm not too worried about. I may try and fix it, I may not. It's not anything important to the operation of the model, it just holds the coupler in place. But it looks like for the most part, these can just easily be stitched together. And something else I have actually noticed is the opening doesn't need to be this big for this truck mount in the rear. As you can see, there's really no fully set in groove, so something that's just a basic simple little hole for a screw to attach to is probably going to be enough, which makes me a lot more confident in the ability of this joint to hold up. I'm most concerned about this because, as you can see, it's the thinnest spot. There's a lot of very weak looking points here. So what I'm thinking is on the top and on the bottom, I can reinforce it with a little bit of styrene. Again, the tolerances may not be perfect, but as you can see, these chassis are pretty warped anyway. I'm just going to try and get these moving again. So it's not going to be original. It's going to take a lot of time with me gluing and using styrene and all that, but I think I'm going to cut the camera, probably spend a couple hours working on that, and come back once these, and maybe even the shells, are firmly attached to each other. So it's now several hours later, and as you can see, this chassis is in one piece, this locomotive is back together, at least the shell, and the other chassis is also done, but I've already put it in the other locomotive, and we'll start with the other locomotive first, because that's where I had to do the least amount of work. So this right here is actually the unit I started second. I used some of the actual scrap pieces from building the first frame. So as you can see, it looks a little more messy. These are much smaller scrap pieces. The other thing I found on the original one, I'll get to that in a little bit, is that I covered up the screw hole here, and just drilling through the styrene didn't work, so I specifically left a pretty big gap right there so the hole could just be screwed into nice and easily, and that seemed to work really well. As you can see, there's some little sheets of styrene on the side right here. I just reinforced everything like crazy and used some super glue to fill in some of these cracks and whatnot, and this one seemed to turn out really well. The shell was the one in better shape, so I also didn't have to do any reinforcements to the shell. I've also already sorted out the hardware for the first dummy locomotive. It's a very weird mismatch. The rear screw is much larger than the front screw for whatever reason. That's how the model was built originally. So on the rear truck, there's going to be a much larger screw, and on the front truck, there will be a much smaller screw. They already fit in just fine. I've test fit it. So after I go through the other locomotive, we can start by putting these trucks back onto the dummy. Before we go into the other locomotive, I did really quickly want to mention these little plates. These were on both of the locomotives, the powered unit and the dummy, and their sole purpose was to block the light and just direct it to the headlight. I don't plan on putting the headlights back in these models. I'll show you the reason why on this whole mess in a little bit, but the headlights aren't going back in, and if I do end up making these frames out of styrene in the future, I'll probably just incorporate these into it. So I'm going to save these pieces, but I don't think I'll use them. And to make the frames that I reinforced with styrene, I don't remember if I showed you down the side of the other one, but there's actually more styrene on the other one than this one. But it wouldn't actually fit in this old little partition right here, so I had to just cut a little bit off the sides, and that made it fit just fine. Now let's go on to the powered unit, which I had many more issues with. First of all, I'm going to start with the frame. The styrene I used here is much cleaner. I just had some larger pieces of scrap styrene that I used. I cut them to look a lot better, and I think it actually looks a lot nicer than the other one. Again, this is a temporary fix. It doesn't have to look perfect, but I think it looks better. Again, I've used super glue to fill the cracks and whatnot, and this frame feels a lot more stable. I've also test fit everything, and it lines up very well with the trucks right here, and it should fit in the model just fine. I've test fit that as well. In the shell itself, I had to make plenty of modifications too. The first one was to mount the chassis. For whatever reason, the way I had attached the styrene down here made it so the original screw wouldn't actually reach all the way to the post. So what I did is I used a little bit of brass tubing and some, I believe it's evergreen styrene tubing, and just made a longer shaft to attach the screw into. This actually works really well, and I think it might be better than the original. As you can see, this was also the shell that had plenty of cosmetic damage. You can see the big crack right here on the roof and essentially all over the model. I used a bunch of super glue to hold the thing together, and I used some little styrene sheets in here, and that actually worked really well. It feels really stable, everything's held together really nicely, and I think just to get this thing going again, it should work just fine. It's not going to stop the zinc rot that this model has encountered forever, but it'll make it usable for the time being, and it's in much better shape than when it arrived to me. In the time I was waiting for that glue to dry, I kept myself busy by looking at the wiring of the powered unit itself, and I've decided that I'm going to throw all of this mess out. What I've got here is just this one little piece. It's a washer that's got a wire soldered to it. I'm not going to reuse this wire either. I'm going to use this green wire, and the way I'm going to attach this to this frame is that there is just the perfect slot for this size of washer to go right into. This is the screw I'm using to attach the front truck into the rebuilt chassis, and it's going to work perfectly, at least I believe so. But this wiring that was originally on the model is very, very sketchy to say the least. We have both of these connectors. I don't know why we need two of them, but they're both here. We have the, I believe this is supposed to be the headlight. It's the only light in the model that is like this. The lighting itself should probably be in the housing, at least that's what I would suspect. And all of this wiring, it looks like the insulation is gone. I think these are two separate polarities of wire. I'm not 100% sure though. So obviously that's no good, and if those are two separate polarities, that's going to cause an immediate short circuit, and I don't want to have to just be chasing wire to reuse the old wire, so we're just going to unsolder it and put on the new green wire in both places. But to sum everything up, I rebuilt the chassis, used some glue and styrene, I rebuilt this shell, again using some glue and styrene, and I just checked out the wiring and decided we needed to delete the headlights. So with all that out of the way, now it's time to actually start working on these models, not off camera, in front of the camera so you can see. We're going to start by putting the trucks back on the dummy unit. Then I'm going to redo the wiring of this whole situation here. And after that, we're going to put these two units back into the chassis here, and we'll test it out, and we will go from there. I'm assuming I'll have to tear these down and give them a good cleanup. They look pretty dirty, but we'll see what's in store for us. I have noticed that these wheels look a little dirty, so while we're here, I'm just going to use some rubbing alcohol and some Q-tips to clean them up. And now that I'm done with the dummy unit, it's time to remove all this wiring and put our fresh green wire in place. So it's time to test this thing out. Last I recall, this model did actually run when I got it out of the box, even though it was crumbled as it was, but the new chassis may have changed some stuff, and I redid the wiring. So let's still see if this thing runs, if it's got any issues, what's going on. And it seems to start straight up. It seems like it is binding a little bit going forward. I'll flip the direction, see how it does in reverse. And it seems to run a lot smoother in reverse. So we do know this model runs, but I think both trucks, the motor truck and the front truck, are going to need a good cleanup. So I've taken both trucks out of the chassis of the locomotive once again. I did it off camera just because I didn't feel like I really had to show it once again. It's already been done several times today, and I figured why show it another time. But these are now separated and ready to be worked on. I did notice that this motor truck feels to have a little bit of binding to it, but I'm suspecting a good cleanup on the part of both trucks should get this thing running pretty well. And I think to start, I'll deal with the simpler of the two, the one without the motor attached to it. I have never worked on one of these before, but I'm suspecting it's just going to be these 4 screws right here, and then we should have access to everything we need to work on. So the clip you just saw was me trying to get this truck apart, to get into it and clean everything out, and obviously that was unsuccessful. I couldn't figure out how to get these side frames off as the plate here was holding them in place, and I really couldn't figure out how to get these off. It was sort of like an impossible puzzle, so I cut the clip and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was going on with that and did some other stuff in between. In fact, it's about 24 hours after that last clip was filmed right now. And the main culprit as to why I couldn't get this apart were the side frames. For whatever reason, the way these side frames were designed, it's essentially impossible to get this truck apart without taking one of these off. The way it works is that the little bar just kind of sat in place down here, and the side frames were screwed into the side of that bar at a 90-degree angle, and that sort of held the wheels in place. And to get the wheels out and subsequently, I believe, slide this piece off, you needed to get that bar out of the way. However, this one was stuck in place, and I'm pretty sure that's where our whole issue came from. Whoever had originally built this kit, as I believe it was a kit, had glued the original bar right here into place, and that made it impossible to get it out with any tools, or essentially any option other than complete destruction of the bar. So I used my rotary tool, cut it in 2 pieces, and now we got it apart, and I think we should be able to get in here. I also did notice that I think the binding that I found earlier in the model is coming from this front truck. I don't know how well you can see it, but there is definitely some sort of a bind in there, and I think we'll figure out whatever it is in here. I'm going to assume it's just some dirt or something like that, and I don't think it should be too difficult to fix. But for the side frames, obviously I don't really have any way to mount them to the model right now. I was thinking of some solutions with styrene, but this video has taken me a lot longer than I would have liked it to, so for now I'm just going to leave these off and not worry about them. I could make some crazy over-engineered part in the near future, but that's going to take a lot of time, and I don't want to delay this much further than I already have. Something else I found is I'm going to have to replace the coupling between the front truck and the rear motor truck. As you can see on both ends, there's a pretty severe crack that's developed. It's just not going to hold on to either of these, and we're going to lose most of our power that way. So I've got this little piece of rubber tubing right here that's fresh and new. It's not cut to length yet, but hopefully when everything's done, I'll get this cut to length, and it should be a very good drive shaft, and it should work perfectly fine in this model. So now we can get back to work. I've just got to remove these 4 screws, and then we should be able to slide this plate straight off. So I just took the cover off of this truck, as you can see, and I think I've immediately found what's causing our binding issue. I'm not sure how well you can see it right there, but on this wheel here, there is a crack in the brass gear. I don't have any replacements for this, and I don't really know of any way to remedy this issue, but what I'm kind of thinking is I might just have to take the entire worm gear assembly out of here, leave the axles in here as they are, clean up this part, and save the worm gear. I may be able to find some new axles for one of these. I'm really not sure. I would like to, but again, for the purposes of just trying to finish this project and get these things running again temporarily, I think I'm going to remove the worm gear, save the parts, and hopefully in the future I can get some sort of replacement axle for this model, because I would like it to be all-wheel drive. I think just the motor truck itself should be enough to propel the model, but again, more power is always better. Now that it's apart, as you can see, this is just kind of spinning freely. It's not attached very well, and that crack is definitely what's causing our binding in there. So I think with that out of the way, the model should run smoothly, even though it's going to be losing some of its power. Well, again, I won't be able to really remedy the situation right now. I think it is good to note that these are directional gears, so I need to be careful about which way I put them in the model. It looks like the side that's got this little ring around it has to go on the opposite side of the motor truck, so it would have to be set up like that. This is more so a reference point for me, because A, I need it for the polarity, and B, if I do end up getting a new gear for this model, I need to put it in the correct way to not cause any damage or anything like that. It's a pretty crucial step. The worm gear assembly itself looks to be in pretty good shape. They used a ridiculous amount of washers on this. Why, I don't exactly know, but that's just how this thing was built apparently, so I'm going to leave them on there. But again, no major wear or anything on the worm gear, so that definitely makes me almost certain that that one cracked gear was our whole issue with this truck. Now it's time to give all these components a good cleaning. I'll even give the worm gear itself a cleanup. Even though it won't be used, it may get used in the future, and I'd like to not have to do more work later on. So we'll clean this, set it aside, and then put the whole truck back together. So now that we got the front truck done and turned into a dummy truck for the time being, it's time to move on to the motor, which I think should be a lot less eventful. The way to get this apart, at least what I am pretty sure is the way to get this apart, is we have these two screws right here on the end of these casings. It looks like these are two separate pieces, so I'd assume you remove these screws, as well as the additional one up here on that one for whatever reason, and then you should be able to pull these off. Then I think you might be able to get the wheels in the side frames themselves out by a little bit of trickery. Then it looks like potentially to get the motor itself split apart, we have this one screw here. Again, I've never worked on one of these before. This is my first time. So let's see how this goes. I'm actually shocked I got everything out perfectly the first time. I was really not expecting that to be the case, but here we are. We have everything split into their separate components, and this way we should be able to go through everything, give it all a good cleanup, give it all some fresh oil, and then put the whole truck back together. Before we do that though, I have noticed a couple of things. The magnet itself seems to have a lot of little metal bits attached to it. I may need to spend a lot of time cleaning that out just to make sure it doesn't bind with the armature of the motor. These wheels here actually don't seem to be cracked, which is good. I don't want them to be cracked, because if so, we'd have a pretty big issue, but seeing as this truck ran just fine, I doubt there's going to be any concern there. I think that was just a weird one-off incident. And the motor itself actually looks really unique. It looks like it might be a 7-pole motor or something like that. Let's see. Yeah, I think that is 7 poles. That's unusual. I've never seen one like that before. Again, my first time working on one of these. It's a neat little model. It's also got a really tiny commutator. I've never seen a commutator that small. But yeah, this is a very unique and weird model. I'm glad I got to work on one of these, but now it's time to clean up all these parts, give them some oil, and put it all back together. So the motor itself is now back together. I've disconnected my microphone just so you can hear it run. I've got some power in my controller, and I have not put any oil on the bearings or anything just yet. I'm gonna do that right after this, but we'll give this thing a slight bit of power. And as you can hear, even without oil, that is a very healthy motor. Now the next step really quick, I'm just gonna give these bearings a little bit of oil as I had just mentioned. And now we'll test it out once again. And that is for sure a very healthy motor. Now it's time for me to finish getting this thing back together. Now, after all that work, I think it's time for what's hopefully the final assembly of this video. I got all the hardware I need picked out. I think I'm going to need a larger washer in the front, a slightly smaller one in the rear. And for the screw, because of the post that I used, I don't know if I mentioned it, I made this little post out of styrene and some brass tubing. I've got one of these little self-tappers. It's the perfect size for that styrene. I've used it a lot, and they seem to work really well. So we're going to use that. I'll start by working with the rear truck, we'll go to the front truck, and then we'll put this into the shell of the model, and hopefully it all fits perfectly fine. So the Lindsay FA is now set up on the track. After all that work, let's see if this thing will run. And it springs straight to life. It's actually a really smooth runner, that's shocking. We'll go in reverse now. And you know what? I'm pretty impressed by that. I've now hooked up the dummy unit to the A unit. I doubt it'll be able to pull it, as this is now only a four-wheel drive model, and for a dummy unit, that's rather hefty. So we'll give it some power, and just for fun, we'll see what happens. Seems like it's actually able to push it. Now let's see if we can pull the dummy unit. It can pull it, but that thing was for sure slipping a lot. Before I close this video out, I do want to talk about a few little things. For one, these are absolutely not completed projects. The whole goal for today was to take these two crumbling units, rebuild them, and get this one running. Obviously, we got them running, but there's still some things that need attention. For one, the truck covers need to go back on this thing. The other thing is, obviously, we have the one gear that's cracked in here, and ideally a new axle would be the best fit. There are also a lot of other really small things around this model. For one, we have absolutely no fan up here. It is a complete gaping hole with nothing in it. Up front, these little pieces here are still kind of falling out. There's no headlight in the model, and there's just a lot of adjustments overall that can be made. And additionally, I don't really have any good KDs or anything on these, which is something I could for sure change. The other thing is, these are for sure not perfect engines. While they are Lindsay models and these are quite rare pieces, these are never going to be perfect. If I try and ship these anywhere, I'm willing to bet that they're just going to crumble to bits, so there's really no reason for me to sell them online or anything. These aren't really engines that I want to get parts units for. Ideally, these are engines that would actually get turned into parts units. The shells are essentially going to turn into junk sooner or later. I have fixed them to the point of where the cracking should slow down. It's never going to stop, and these will likely still completely crumble at some point. So ideally, I could get a new shell or another unit to build off of. These are just going to be fun experimental pieces for me, and I had fun gaining some experience on models from a manufacturer I've never worked on before. I actually have another Lindsay model to work on in the near future. I have a switcher which is not zinc rotted as insane as these two are. I believe there isn't even any zinc rot on it whatsoever. And what I've learned with working on these models is definitely going to help that project, and ideally that should be a really good result. I do still want to experiment with some things. I want to see if I can recreate a new system for holding these side frames on, both for the motor here, for this truck here that was originally geared and essentially motorized, if you want to call it that. And I also want to make a new solution for these trucks here. I think it'll help in the long run. Again, these are pieces that, while they may be valuable in some condition, I don't think these ones are. These are the perfect pieces for me to experiment on, and if needed, they'd be perfect parts engines. So I'm quite happy with what we've accomplished. We got this unit running really well. Both of these are now back together, and it's been a great learning experience for me with some of these Lindsay models. I'm going to keep experimenting with these off camera, but for today, we are done.